During the October holidays, I returned to my hometown to attend a high school reunion. At the reunion, as the conversation grew lively, someone jokingly asked when Ethan and I, his childhood friend, were planning to get married. Ethan replied, "Whenever Lark decides she wants to, we'll get married." I froze, feeling utterly confused. Did I miss something significant here? Wasn't I the one who chased him for 3 years, only to be rejected every single time? Not only that, he went on to date someone else and even called me cheap in the process. I raised my hand hesitantly, saying, I have a husband already. I'm married. Suddenly, the entire room fell silent. Ethan's glass slipped from his hand. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and showed a picture of my marriage certificate, grinning widely in the photo. "Here, look at my marriage certificate." Ethan snatched my phone, glanced at the picture, and his eyes instantly turned bloodshot. Startled, I quickly grabbed my phone back before he could smash it. "My husband had just bought me this phone. Why didn't you tell me you were getting married?" I was even more baffled now. After he started dating someone else, he told me to give up on him, subtly and not so subtly belittling me. What was going on now? "Melody, Ethan's been waiting for you all this time, waiting for you to finish grad school and come back so you two could get married. Weren't you studying abroad? How did you get married?" Wait, grad school doesn't forbid marriage, does it? I felt like I had stepped into an alternate dimension. Nothing made sense anymore. Wasn't I the one who spent 3 years chasing after Ethan? Wasn't he the one who said he didn't like me? Wasn't he the one who called me cheap? Wasn't he the one who told me to stay away from him and focus on my studies? Ethan and I grew up together, attending the same kindergarten class. We were in the same class throughout elementary school, middle school, high school, and even college. We were inseparable. As kids, his mom even used to joke about calling me her future daughter-in-law. Ethan never denied it and treated me well, which led me to mistakenly believe he liked me too. When we started college, I figured the timing was right and spent 3 years chasing him, dreaming of a future where we'd be together. For those 3 years, I went all out to win his heart. I catered to his every need, treated him like royalty, and practically worshipped him. But while he basked in my devotion, he never agreed to be with me. The turning point came when Rose entered the picture. Rose transferred to our program during junior year. She was brilliant and beautiful, and from that moment on, Ethan began avoiding me. Eventually, I heard rumors about Ethan and Rose going on dates. At the time, everyone still assumed Ethan and I were a couple. Unable to take it anymore, I asked him for a clear answer. He told me, "You're just the girl next door to me, like a little sister. We'll never have anything more. I've been nice to you because I care about you as a neighbor, not because I see you as a romantic partner. Do you understand?" I understood, but what I didn't understand was why he kept leading me on, giving me false hope of a relationship. Why did he seem so comfortable letting me dote on him, laughing whenever people teased us about being a couple? I spiraled into a period of despair. However, while my love life crumbled, my academic ambitions soared. I threw myself into studying and preparing for grad school. During the first semester of senior year, Ethan officially started dating Rose. He took the opportunity to announce to everyone that I was just his neighbor and that people had misunderstood our relationship all along. Rose didn't hold back either. She confronted me in front of everyone, saying, "Melody, your behavior is so degrading, so cheap. Back when Ethan didn't have a girlfriend, fine, you could chase him all you wanted. But now that we're together, I expect you to have some self-respect. Stay away from him. I don't like other women being close to my boyfriend." She didn't leave me a shred of dignity. But looking back, I had to admit she was right. If my boyfriend were being close to another girl, I'd be upset too. From that day onward, I started changing myself. I constantly reminded myself that I needed to erase Ethan from my heart, though it hurt a lot. Ethan's mom noticed I had started distancing myself from him and even came to my house to ask if Ethan had done something to upset me. I told her no. She said, "Then why don't you come over to our house anymore?" I frowned and replied, "He has a girlfriend now. I need to keep my distance." But she just laughed. "Sure, she's his girlfriend now, but that doesn't mean she'll be his girlfriend forever. You're still my top choice for a daughter-in-law. Ethan's just not thinking straight right now. He thinks good women are easy to find, but I've met that girl. She's trouble, definitely not someone who knows how to behave. Listen to your aunt. Stay by his side, take care of him, cheer him up. He'll come back to you sooner or later." I was stunned. After seeing her off, I told my parents my plan to prepare for graduate school in another city. Knowing that Jasmine already had a girlfriend and still reeling from the confrontation with her earlier, my parents agreed it might be best for me to leave for a while. They immediately supported my idea. And so, I left our state and moved to another city for my master's degree. Jasmine, on the other hand, stayed in our hometown after graduation, found a stable job, and settled down. He reached out to me occasionally, but I didn't think much of it. I'd only reply to him briefly on WhatsApp now and then. I thought that was the end of our story until that class reunion stirred everything up again. I didn't get it. Why did those classmates ask when we were getting married? I'm asking you, why didn't you tell me you were getting married? I snapped out of my daze and looked at Jasmine, who was glaring at me with inexplicable anger. "You're just my neighbor. Why would I need to tell you?" The words he once said to me, I finally threw them back at him. Jasmine slammed his glass down and stormed out. The reunion ended awkwardly, with everyone leaving in a sour mood. When I got home, I found myself added to a group chat with 5 of our former high school classmates. River. "Melody, what's going on between you and Jasmine? He always told me he was waiting to marry you after you graduated. Why's everything so messy now?" Mark. "Yeah, you two were so close in high school and didn't you even go to the same college? What happened?" Ray. "Exactly. My mom used to say how envious she was of you two growing up together since Jasmine's mom told her you'd be getting married soon." Mark. "Yeah, back in high school, you treated him so well. We all thought you'd end up together. Even after graduation, Jasmine kept asking me for help choosing wedding venues." From their messages, I pieced together that Jasmine had never told them what truly happened during college. He'd created some fantasy where we were childhood sweethearts destined to marry, completely erasing the fact that he'd had a girlfriend or even insulted me. They didn't know about the girlfriend who once called me cheap, nor the cruel things he said to me. I couldn't fathom why he'd fabricate such a story. Curious, I reached out to Jasmine's former roommate to ask about him and Rose. "Oh, those two, they broke up after senior year. Rose left him to be someone else's mistress. But Jasmine claimed he dumped her and reconnected with you afterward, saying you still liked him and that you'd probably marry him once you finished grad school." I was utterly shocked. Jasmine and I had hardly spoken, and I didn't even know he and Rose had broken up. Everything he told them was a complete lie. I stopped contacting Jasmine and explained the truth to the friends from the group chat. I did pursue him once, but by senior year, he was with Rose. He told me not to overthink things and said he'd never be with me. He even called me cheap. That's when I cut ties with him. Since then, we've barely communicated. At most, I've replied to his texts occasionally. Our relationship is no deeper than that of acquaintances. And most importantly, I'm already married. If my husband found out about all this, he'd lose it. In the end, the group concluded that Jasmine must have some kind of delusional disorder. After all, he'd concocted an entirely fictional narrative. I told my parents about it, and they were horrified. But they also pointed out that during all my time away, Jasmine hadn't shown any obvious red flags, and his mother only occasionally came by to ask when I'd returned to our hometown. Still, I decided to take my parents back with me to the city where I live after the holidays, to keep as much distance as possible from Jasmine's family. I'd sensed something was seriously off with Jasmine, like the obsessive, unstable characters you'd read about in novels. Staying in this town seemed too risky. "But why didn't you tell us you were married?" my mom asked, still shocked. "Well, my boyfriend's family was dealing with something at the time, so we registered our marriage quietly. Since my residency was still listed under Grandpa's address, I just borrowed the document from him. As for my husband, he's still sorting out things with his family. Once it's all handled, I'll bring him home to meet you." My parents sighed. They'd thought my feelings for Jasmine were so strong that there might still be a chance for us, but things had turned out so differently. "Fate works in strange ways," my dad mused. I shook my head. Meeting my husband was the best thing that ever happened to me. Back then, when I was heartbroken and ran away to another city, it was my husband who stayed by my side, comforting me and helping me heal. "I don't think I can ever fall in love again," I said. Ethan, my husband, replied, "Heartbreak is just a temporary gap between relationships. When someone better comes along, heartbreak becomes irrelevant. So, how about considering me? I dare say I'm much better than your lousy childhood sweetheart. You can use me to get over your emotional wounds." His words made me laugh, but he was right. Having him by my side helped me quickly move past the gloom of heartbreak. And just like that, we got together. Being with Ethan felt effortless. I didn't have to try and impress him or go out of my way to please him. In fact, Ethan pampered me endlessly, making me feel cherished beyond measure. The difference between him and the way Jasmine treated me back then was night and day. It was 8 p.m. when my mom came to my room and told me Jasmine was waiting downstairs. Curious about what Jasmine wanted, I went downstairs to face him. My parents, worried that things might get out of hand, reminded me to call out loudly if anything went wrong. Jasmine and I sat silently in the living room for 5 minutes. Finally, he broke the silence. "You liked me, didn't you? So why did you marry someone else? I was waiting for you to graduate so we could get married." I looked up at him, unsure how to handle this situation. "You told me you didn't like me. You said you only saw me as a neighbor and that your kindness toward me was just out of courtesy. You said you'd never fall for me." "That was just me speaking out of anger," he replied. I felt confused. "But you had a girlfriend at the time, didn't you? And no one provoked you then, so how could that be anger? Plus, you and your girlfriend made a fool of me in public, and you didn't even bother standing up for me. You both teamed up to humiliate me." "I thought I liked her," Jasmine explained, "but she turned out to be too much. She was with me while also seeing other men and even became someone's mistress. That's when I realized I didn't truly like her, I was just infatuated with her looks. During that time, I came to understand that my real feelings were for you." His words disgusted me. "No, Jasmine, you truly liked her. It's only because she didn't reciprocate that you're trying to save face by using me as a fallback option. And surely you don't think I still have feelings for you after all these years." "I don't." He didn't respond to that, but instead shifted the topic abruptly. "Did you get married just to spite me?" I was stunned. Jasmine's so unbelievably self-centered. "If that's the case, you should get a divorce. If your husband refuses, I'll find a lawyer for you. I don't want you sacrificing your lifelong happiness just to get back at me." I was at a loss for words. Clearly, our minds worked on entirely different wavelengths. And honestly, I hated my past self for being so pathetic that Jasmine still thinks I couldn't live without him, that I might have married someone just to annoy him. Jasmine, you've misunderstood. My husband and I are very happy together. He wanted to join me on this trip, but he was tied up with work, so I came alone. We love each other deeply, and he treats me wonderfully. The situation you're imagining doesn't exist. I didn't marry him to spite you, I married him because he gives me security and because I love him. Jasmine still didn't seem convinced. "You've liked me for so many years. You're someone who holds onto feelings for a long time. There's no way you suddenly stopped liking me and started liking someone else. You've only known him for a year, right? How could your feelings for him surpass what you felt for me? If it's just been a year, your love for him can't be genuine. That makes your feelings pretty cheap, doesn't it?" I felt a wave of helplessness. Explaining myself to him seemed futile. He was too entrenched in his own distorted logic to see reason. "Jasmine, whatever happened between us is in the past. I hope you can forget all about it and find a nice girl to be with. Whether my feelings are cheap or not doesn't matter to you anymore. Because my love is now reserved for my husband, it has nothing to do with you." But Jasmine shook his head. "After everything I've been through, I realize how amazing you are. I genuinely regret how I treated you before. Please give me another chance. I promise I'll treat you well this time. I was just too proud before to appreciate your love, but now I understand how wrong I was. Please, just one more chance." "Jasmine, I'm already married. What you're doing right now is highly inappropriate. There's nothing more to discuss. Go home and think about your actions." I asked my dad to escort him out and return to my room. This situation had spiraled far beyond anything I'd anticipated, and I knew I needed to leave soon to avoid further complications. But before I could make my escape, Jasmine caused yet another scene. He updated his social media with a new post, a photo of me. The caption read, "The love of my life." When I saw it, I was genuinely horrified. "Jasmine, how did he become so obsessive? Or maybe he's just out of his mind, and I had been looking at him through rose-colored glasses all along, failing to see who he really was. His behavior is truly terrifying. I distinctly remember explaining everything to him last night, but he still went ahead and posted that status on social media. And below his post, the likes kept piling up. Many people left comments, congratulating us and wishing us a lifetime of happiness together. Our group chat was flooded with question marks. Wait, didn't you say yesterday that there was nothing going on between you two? What's going on here? Jasmine posted this on social media. What does she even mean by it? Aren't you already married? Why would she post something like that? I massaged my temples and explained. She said I got married just to spite her, that I'm head over heels in love with her. I've tried to explain, but she just doesn't get it. What? Seriously? Everyone was in utter disbelief. If she's saying stuff like that and your husband hears about it, he'll definitely be upset. What is Jasmine even trying to pull? So what do you plan to do? Are you going to respond? Melody chimed in. I think I'll post something too. After pixelating my marriage certificate, I uploaded it to my social media, adding the caption, "Happily married to the love of my life. We're doing great, thanks for asking." But within 2 minutes, Jasmine commented below. Still mad at me? You don't love him, divorce him, I'm okay with that. I silently screamed into my hands. What is Jasmine's problem? Because of her comment, the narrative completely shifted. Now everyone thought I had only gotten married to spite her. No matter how much I tried to explain, it didn't matter. Now I finally understand how powerful rumors can be. No amount of explanation seemed to work. I also now truly understand the saying. Spreading a rumor takes seconds, but debunking it feels like an endless marathon. Just as I felt like I was about to lose my mind, there was a knock on my door. I assumed it was my dad bringing me some fruit, but when I opened the door, it was Ethan. My mood instantly lifted, and I practically threw myself at him, wrapping my arms around him. "Oh, I missed you so much," Ethan smiled and kissed my forehead. "I missed you too. Come on, let's head downstairs. Your mom and dad are waiting." When I arrived, I introduced myself, and they told me you weren't feeling great and were upstairs. They asked me to check on you. What's been going on? Who's been upsetting my wife? I couldn't help but feel a wave of grievance. I poured out the whole story to him, venting my frustrations. I swear, I feel like going back in time just to slap my past self. If I hadn't been so selfless and pathetic back then, no one would believe the nonsense Jasmine is saying now. It's all my fault. Ethan gently stroked my hair. "Why are you beating yourself up? None of this is your fault. You liked her back then, of course, you wanted to treat her well. It's normal, you just didn't balance things properly. Having rose-colored glasses is pretty common, it doesn't mean you're to blame. This kind of manipulative behavior? That's on her. You don't need to deal with it, I will. For now, let's go downstairs. I haven't had the chance to really talk to your mom and dad yet." Ethan took my hand and led me downstairs, where he began chatting warmly with my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Collins, I owe you an apology. Things were a bit chaotic at the time my grandfather was gravely ill, and his last wish was to see me get married. Melody, being kind-hearted, agreed to register our marriage first. I didn't get a chance to ask for your blessing beforehand, and that was my mistake. That's why I'm here to make amends. In a few days, my parents will also come to formally apologize. They feel terrible about Melody being put in such a difficult position." My parents couldn't stop smiling. I had already told them that my husband was a top achiever, not to mention incredibly handsome and successful, basically, way out of my league. Now that they'd met him in person, they were even more convinced that I had married up. After all, my husband had it all: looks, charisma, presence, everything. By the end of their conversation, the three of them were all in high spirits. I was the only one sitting there with a heavy heart. My parents glanced at the mountain of gifts Ethan had brought, which filled up half the living room, looking a bit overwhelmed. "Dad, Mom, I'll help Melody sort everything out. You two should take a break." I stared at the pile of gifts, feeling utterly defeated. Why did I have to be the one to organize everything? Ethan noticed my reluctance and pinched my cheek with a smile. "I'll handle the sorting. I just need you to tell me where everything should go. Don't worry. You won't have to lift a finger." Hearing this, I suddenly felt guilty. Now you're making me seem petty and unkind. Am I really that hard to please? Ethan quickly waved his hands in denial. No, that's not what I meant. It's my fault for phrasing it poorly. You're very hardworking, I just don't want my wife overexerting herself, that's all. My mom watched our interaction and couldn't help rolling her eyes, looking like she'd had enough of our antics. Leave it for now, it's late. You can deal with it tomorrow. Go get some rest. With her approval, I grinned and dragged Ethan back to the bedroom. As soon as we got there, I peeled off his suit jacket and plopped myself right onto his lap. You're the best, I said with a grin. Ethan tapped the tip of my nose playfully. How could I not treat you well? If I didn't, you'd probably run off. And then, who's going to compensate me for losing such a wonderful wife? Smart choice. Ethan and I took a selfie together, and I posted it to my social media, along with a snapshot of the half-living room full of gifts he'd just brought over. My husband came to visit me. Look at all this stuff he brought us. No place to put it. Within moments, comments started pouring in. Wait, what? You're actually married? No way, are you seriously flexing on us? Your husband must be loaded. Wow, find me a rich and generous husband like yours. Your husband is so handsome, way better than Jasmine. Totally rooting for you guys. OMG, Jasmine's been spreading lies about you. This is getting messy. For real, what's going on with you and Jasmine? He said you two were getting married, but here you are with someone else. My brain's about to explode. Are you and Jasmine playing some kind of love triangle drama? Is this one of those I love her but she loves him kind of scripts? Ethan scrolled through the comments on my phone, visibly amused. Meanwhile, I egged him on. I can't believe I ever liked someone like Jasmine. What was I thinking? I must have been out of my mind. Ethan chuckled, patted my head, and pulled me into his arms. Leave it to me. Tomorrow, I'll make an official announcement. I'll make sure the whole world knows I'm your lawful husband. I nodded with a smile. If Ethan said he could do it, I knew he absolutely could. The next morning, my parents woke me up, saying that Jasmine's mother had come to our house. I was beyond annoyed I hadn't even fully woken up yet. Ethan spent a good while comforting me before I begrudgingly dragged myself downstairs, still fighting off my morning grumpiness. When Jasmine's mom saw the two of us coming down together, her expression soured immediately. I had barely sat down when she started talking. You know, a good girl should be more reserved. Look at yourself, what kind of example are you setting? Coming out of the same room with a man first thing in the morning? Excuse me? Ma'am, this is my husband. Is there something wrong with me sharing a room with my husband? I know you must have found someone to act as your husband to fool Jasmine. You're pretending to be married, but this kind of game is beneath us. Stop playing hard to get. Jasmine told me he's willing to marry you. I'm here to tell you that you should stop this nonsense. Sure, Jasmine might have made some mistakes before, but I already told you just coax him a little and everything will be fine. Why make such a big deal out of it? Do you really enjoy seeing Jasmine in so much pain? He didn't even eat dinner last night. I stared at her in disbelief. I finally understood where Jasmine got his warped sense of entitlement. Ethan squeezed my hand and calmly said, Ma'am, Melody and I are legally married. I'm not sure what's going on with your son, but I would appreciate it if he could stay away from us and stop interfering in our lives. Jasmine's mom let out a cold laugh. You're young and naive, clearly unprepared for the harsh realities of life. My son Jasmine has been outstanding since he was a child, miles ahead of you in every way. Melody has loved Jasmine for years, there's no way she'd suddenly give up on him. You've obviously been deceived. Trust me, take the advice of someone older and wiser. Divorce Melody while you can. At least you'll save yourself some dignity. I was so furious I laughed. I truly didn't understand what gave her the audacity to come here and say such things. Before I could respond, my mom stepped in from the side. Leave. From now on, you're not welcome in our home. We've been neighbors for 20 years, so I've tolerated you out of courtesy. But now you come here to criticize my daughter and son-in-law. Who do you think you are? Get out, now. For the first time in my life, I saw my mom truly angry. She stormed over, grabbed Jasmine's mom by the arm, and shoved her out the door. Don't come back here. We're done. The door slammed shut with a loud bang. I stood there, stunned, and started clapping. Mom, that was amazing, my mom rolled her eyes. I've always thought she had a lousy attitude. She never directed it at me before, so I let it slide, thinking neighbors should look out for each other. But now she's come here to lecture my daughter and son-in-law. She's delusional, acting like the world revolves around her. Go back to bed, you two. I regret even waking you up for this nonsense. Yawning, I clung to Ethan. Carry me upstairs, I don't feel like walking. My mom gave me a look. You're so lazy. Just as Ethan picked me up, we heard a knock at the door again. My mom checked the security camera. It's Jasmine. I instantly snapped awake. Are you kidding me? Could this family just not let it go? I jumped out of Ethan's arms, marched to the door, and said firmly, Jasmine, if you keep disturbing us, I'm calling the police. Stop bothering me already. I've made myself clear. Don't come back, Melody said firmly. Lark, I can explain I really like you know. I love you, I only realized it now. Even when I was with others, I kept comparing them to you. We broke up because none of them could ever match you. I know I was wrong, but I truly love you, Ethan pleaded desperately. Ethan walked over and glanced at the monitor, where Jasmine was obsessively ringing the doorbell. Why does he stick around like some stubborn adhesive? Ethan muttered under his breath. Watching Jasmine's relentless behavior, Ethan finally had enough. He unplugged the wires to the camera and intercom system. Silence at last. When Jasmine realized the doorbell wasn't working anymore, he started pounding on the door. The banging grew louder and more desperate. Ethan didn't hesitate. He called the police immediately. Before long, the cops arrived and escorted Jasmine away. Thanks to the commotion, I couldn't sleep at all. Still, there was a silver lining. I silently thanked Rose. She saved me from the nightmare of ending up with Jasmine. If we had gotten together, I'd probably have been driven insane by him and his overbearing mother. Ethan picked up his phone and made a call. Post it. Not 5 minutes later, our marriage certificate was trending all over social media. The Sweet Empire's prince has made it official. The certificate had all sensitive information blurred out, leaving only a photo of the two of us, grinning as if we were the happiest people on earth. Below the photo was a message. My wife and I are officially married, just making it public today. To anyone who's been bothering my wife, back off. Keep it up and you'll be hearing from my lawyer. I had no idea what was happening online, but my phone went completely berserk. My social media was in chaos. Messages flooded in so fast that my phone froze under the strain. I could imagine their shock not at me, but at learning about Ethan's identity. They were probably wondering how I managed to marry up. But honestly, it wasn't some grand, calculated move. I just happened to meet Ethan at one of his family's dessert shops. He said it was love at first sight. Apparently, he was visiting one of their branches when he saw me, sitting there eating cake, looking utterly heartbroken. Curious, he approached me to find out what had happened. I was so fragile at the time that I poured my heart out to him without hesitation. We exchanged numbers, became friends, and with his encouragement, I slowly moved on from my heartbreak. Eventually, we became a couple. To sum it up, no dramatic beginning, no turbulent romance, just a simple, straightforward love story. After Ethan's identity went public, my family home basically turned into Grand Central Station. To escape the swarm of opportunistic relatives, Ethan whisked me and my parents off to a hotel. I found the whole situation absurd. Imagine needing to stay in a hotel while visiting your own hometown. We stayed there until the holiday ended. Then Ethan and I took my parents on a trip before heading back home. It turns out Jasmine was still lingering near my old house, knocking on the door every now and then. When he realized I wouldn't return, he somehow tracked me down at school. He went around asking everyone if they knew me, claiming to be my ex-boyfriend, and even talking about marriage. Given that I was already attracting attention at school because of Ethan's announcement, Jasmine's antics only made things worse. I called the police again, and they took him away. Ethan was fed up. To him, Jasmine was like a ticking time bomb with questionable mental health, a constant nuisance. He started digging into Jasmine's past and discovered that his mother had spent years in a psychiatric hospital. In hindsight, some of her behavior made sense. We began to suspect that Jasmine might have inherited some kind of mental illness. While he acted normal most of the time, he seemed to lose control when faced with significant setbacks. Ethan eventually tracked down Rose's contact information. When Rose answered, she was surprised to hear from me. She recounted her experience with Jasmine. Back then, she dated him, but he constantly criticized her. He'd complain that her cooking wasn't as good as mine or that she wasn't as attentive. She was furious. She wasn't his maid, after all. On top of that, he kept comparing her to me, his former crush, and expected her to cater to him and his mother like some kind of servant. It was unbearable. She wanted to break up, but Jasmine refused. He blamed her for stealing me, the woman he believed he should have ended up with, and said breaking up was her punishment. Things got even worse when he started physically abusing her. That was the final straw. She told him she had fallen for someone else and walked away for good. Jasmine couldn't handle it. Self-centered as he was, he couldn't accept being lesser than someone else. He began stalking her and harassing her family to the point where they had to move. After she unilaterally announced their breakup, she left her hometown with her family, fearing that Jasmine might come looking for her again. Later, she heard that Jasmine had been spreading rumors about her, claiming she had become someone's mistress. She couldn't even bother to refute it. She simply didn't want anything to do with Jasmine anymore. In the end, she said, "This is my karma, the consequence of being a mistress back then. If I had known Jasmine was this kind of person, I wouldn't have gotten involved with you two no matter what. You two had your master and servant dynamic back then, and it seemed to work just fine." I was speechless. Her words were still as vicious as ever. Recently, Jasmine seems to have given up on his job entirely, spending his days lingering around the entrance of our school, waiting for me to show up. I've been too frightened to even go to school. After confirming that Jasmine indeed had mental health issues, Ethan directly tracked down Jasmine's father, who had abandoned the family over a decade ago. Ethan then arranged for Jasmine to be sent to a psychiatric hospital, taking him away from my school entrance. I'm only helping him get the treatment he needs, and I'm footing the bill for everything. He should be grateful to me. After all, his father certainly is, Ethan said matter-of-factly. Later, I heard that Jasmine had been repeating my name every day, saying that he didn't understand things back then, that he had wronged me, and that he hoped I would forgive him. How much of it is genuine? How much is false? How much is sincere? I don't care anymore. Because back then, I really did have feelings for him, and it felt like I had to die and be reborn just to dig him out of my heart. Having been through all this, I now feel that I'm actually rather lucky. Lucky that I didn't end up with Jasmine. Lucky that I met Ethan. Perhaps it's heaven's blessing, fate working its mysterious ways. End. End of the first story. Subscribe to my channel if you like my stories. Don't miss the second exciting story. Story 2. I secretly went to visit my husband, who was working in another city, only to catch him red-handed in an affair. He shielded the girl behind him, looking at me with a hint of defensiveness. Don't make things difficult for her. It's my fault, I'll take full responsibility. Looking at him, I suddenly smiled. Oddly, it didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. How could he be at fault? All he wanted was to pursue his vibrant love. And what would I get? Well, that would be all of our shared assets. Ridiculous. Besides him, who else still believes in love these days? When I caught Ethan lying in bed with a stranger, I was still struck speechless, despite having prepared myself for this moment. I had a hunch the moment I walked through the door. There was a pair of high heels that didn't belong to me by the entrance and a purse hanging on the rack that wasn't mine either. The sound of the door opening must have startled them because the laughter of the girl inside suddenly stopped. I walked to the bedroom. The door was ajar. Ethan was smoking, flicking the ashes into the ashtray on the nightstand. The girl was huddled under the blanket, her head resting on his chest, avoiding my gaze. "What are you doing here?" "You could have at least called ahead," Ethan said hoarsely, putting out his cigarette before leisurely looking me in the eye. There wasn't a trace of panic or guilt in his expression. His eyes were calm, like a still, lifeless pond. My chest tightened as if a massive hand was gripping my heart. I stared at him in disbelief. Even though I had mentally prepared myself, I still staggered back a step when I heard Ethan's words. "So, even seeing your own husband required an advance notice now." I hid my trembling hands behind my back and forced myself to speak, looking straight into his eyes. "Do you even realize what you're doing?" As soon as the words left my mouth, I realized how ridiculous I sounded. Of course, he knew. I shifted my gaze to the girl. Emboldened by Ethan's attitude, she dared to meet my eyes. With just one look, I understood everything. "What's your name?" I asked her. Before she could answer, Ethan extended his arm, shielding her behind him. For the first time, his face showed some emotion defensiveness. "Sophie, don't make this hard for her. This is on me. I'll take full responsibility." Ethan got out of bed and pulled a crisp new dress from the wardrobe. He handed it to the girl, his tone full of tenderness and reassurance. "Here, put this on. Go home for now. I'll come find you later." The girl nodded shyly. She turned her back to us and slipped the dress over her head. Ethan zipped it up for her himself. Watching him, I couldn't help but laugh. I laughed so hard that the tears threatening to spill from my eyes were forced back. Ignoring them, I walked out to the balcony. The window was open, and the hot summer breeze rushed in, scattering the excitement I'd felt driving over 200 miles to surprise him. Ethan personally escorted the girl out, watching her step into the elevator. The front door opened and closed, then opened and closed again. Ethan stood in the living room, just a few feet away from me, yet it felt as though a vast chasm separated us. Clearing his throat, he finally spoke. "Sophie, we need to talk." Ethan lit another cigarette. He leaned against the couch, a small smile playing on his lips as he spoke of the girl, like a boy who had just fallen in love for the first time. "It's exhausting, really. If it weren't for Lily, I don't think I could have made it this far. Sophie, there's no love left between us. Let's just call it quits. Before we have kids, it's better for both of us." He spoke with such conviction, as if he had rehearsed these lines in his mind countless times. Let's call it quits. Those 3 light words swept away the 10 years we had spent together. 4 years of dating. 6 years of marriage. The cautious, attentive boy I once knew had grown up and changed. When he finished his cigarette, he stood up, grabbed his car keys, and headed for the door. Before leaving, he looked back at me. "Think about the divorce. I'll try my best to make it up to you." After Ethan left, I stood in the living room for a long time. I didn't sit on the couch. It felt tainted. There was nothing of mine left in the house. Ethan must have packed it all away. The stuffed animals by the bed, the nightgowns in the closet, the skincare products in the bathroom, none of it was mine anymore. I turned off the recording on my phone and took a few photos before heading back to my car. On the passenger seat sat an ultrasound report neatly stored in a folder. It was a surprise I had prepared for Ethan. He probably would never know. That morning, after leaving the hospital following my checkup, I was so excited that I called Ethan several times. He didn't pick up any of my calls. I didn't think much of it, assuming he was busy. After taking a day off from work, I got into my car and drove to the city where Ethan worked, eager to tell him the news in person. Looking back now, maybe everything had its signs. From the time he stopped coming home as often. The year we were planning our wedding, Ethan's job got transferred to another city. He held me in his arms, patiently comforting me. "Sophie, trust me, please." But I didn't trust him. I never believed in long-distance relationships. Later, he promised to send me all his salary, come home once a week, and keep me updated at all times. For the sake of his career and future, I gave in. Ethan said he was exhausted, but I was tired too. When the house was being renovated, I argued endlessly with the contractors Ethan didn't know. When our parents were sick and hospitalized, I shuttled tirelessly between the hospital and home Ethan didn't know. During the 2 years of trying to conceive, enduring failure after failure, and facing relentless pressure from my parents, Ethan didn't know that either. Love gave me the strength to endure countless hardships and shoulder all the grievances alone. But Ethan said that without someone else, he wouldn't have made it this far. I chuckled bitterly, tears welling up in my eyes but refusing to fall. I didn't even feel genuinely sad anymore. So much so that I didn't even have the energy to argue with Ethan in a fit of rage. I didn't drive home that night. Instead, I checked into a hotel. After taking a shower, I lay on the bed, my thoughts hazy. Ethan called me in the middle of the night. He had probably gone home and realized I wasn't there. "Are you home?" His voice was restrained, devoid of any concern. Before I could respond, he continued, "I'll be back this week. Let's talk about the divorce. If you have any requests, just let me know. Let's not tell our parents for now." The call ended, and my mind gradually cleared. I guess now that I had discovered the truth, he didn't feel the need to pretend anymore. I forced a smile, but it was feeble. The next day, when I returned to my city, I didn't even go home. I went straight to the hospital. The tears I had been holding back finally fell when I scheduled the abortion. The procedure was set for the following week. The child I had been longing for had come at the worst possible time. As I walked out of the hospital, Ethan's mother called me. "Sophie, are you home? Your dad made some pork rib soup and stewed pig trotters for you. We're bringing it over now." I sat in my car, tears suddenly streaming uncontrollably. My throat felt clogged, as if stuffed with cotton, and I couldn't utter a single word. Ethan's mother kept rambling on. It wasn't until I composed myself that I managed a simple, "Okay." When I got home, Ethan's parents were already busy in the kitchen. After greeting them, I retreated to the bedroom. How hard could a long-distance relationship really be? Ethan's father was a soldier. Before he retired, Ethan's mother had raised Ethan on her own. How had they managed back then? After dinner, I saw Ethan's parents off and curled up on the couch. Ethan's words from the night before echoed in my mind, each one striking my heart like a blow. "Sophie, it's not that I've changed. It's that we've both changed. The way you calculate every penny now, it's suffocating me, truly. But Lily's different. She's innocent, carefree. A single piece of cake can make her happy for half a day." I almost let out a bitter laugh. Ethan said I was calculating. I wouldn't deny it. But he seemed to have forgotten. During those 4 years of college, it was my living expenses that supported the both of us. Maybe it was because of his military upbringing, but Ethan's father had strict expectations for him. His living allowance was minimal, but being in a relationship was expensive. I scrimped and saved, penny by penny, to fulfill so many of his wishes. After we got married, it was him who proposed handing over his salary. I managed all the household expenses, the mortgage, car payments, and social obligations, carefully budgeting everything. I thought our life was getting better and better, but in the end, it couldn't withstand the brutal kick of reality. Ethan said he had loved me once, but that love eventually became something else, something tainted. I smiled at him, not bothering to refute any of his accusations against me. What was the point of arguing when the love was gone? I only asked him one question. When did it start with Lily? He pressed his lips together, saying nothing. I didn't intend to save this marriage. He must have misunderstood. That's probably why he called me in the middle of the night to remind me that we'd already reached the point of divorce. I wasn't devastated, but there was still a sour ache in my chest. The wedding photo from 6 years ago was placed in the most noticeable spot in the living room, its presence stinging my eyes. I walked over and pulled the photo out of the frame. A folded piece of paper fell out, landing on the floor. I bent down to pick it up, but my fingers paused when I saw what was written on it. Straightening up, I laughed, somewhat dazed. Ethan probably didn't even remember anymore. 6 years ago, he had written down every word, every promise, as he earnestly and fervently vowed to marry me. Back then, his love was so genuine, so passionate, that I truly believed he would treat me well for the rest of my life. During the first 2 years of our long-distance relationship, he would sneak back home 2 or 3 times a week, chasing the nighttime stars and the rising sun. I felt heartbroken for him. He stroked the top of my head and said he couldn't feel at ease knowing there was a little crybaby waiting for him at home. Later, he got promoted, his work grew busier, and I gradually accepted our long-distance arrangement. But every Friday, he still insisted on coming home. His paycheck always went straight into my hands. If I didn't use it, he'd transfer it to my account himself. The credit card bills were always sent to my email. I never doubted his sincerity, but trust, like love, is fragile. Like sand sealed inside a glass bottle once broken, it scatters. I tucked the piece of paper away and sat in silence for a long time. It wasn't until the doorbell rang that I snapped out of my thoughts. Everything of Ethan's in the house had been packed into boxes. I called a moving service to have the boxes sent to his new place. The delivery arrived at his door by 8 p.m. Ethan called me, his tone noticeably irritated. "Sophie, what the hell are you doing? What's the meaning of packing all my stuff and sending it over?" His voice suddenly became gratingly sharp. I froze for a moment, then hung up on him. What could I possibly mean? He cheated, he wanted the divorce so obviously, he should be the one to leave. Ethan came back on Saturday around noon. He stood at the door, repeatedly pressing the doorbell. Through the camera, I saw his irritated expression and Lily trying to console him. I hadn't expected him to bring Lily along, boldly showing up to discuss the divorce. Unable to get inside, he finally called me. "Sophie, did you change the locks? We're not even divorced yet. Don't go too far." It seemed all his tenderness had been an act. Once love fades, every word spoken becomes a jab. Lying on the spa bed, I held the phone farther from my ear. "Well, at least you remember we're not divorced yet. Then what's the meaning of bringing your mistress along? I rarely spoke with sarcasm. This was probably the first time I'd ever spoken to Ethan like this. My friend lying next to me gave me a thumbs up. On the other end of the line, Ethan audibly hesitated. His phone, which had been on speaker, switched to private mode. His gaze finally shifted to the camera. The day after I sent Ethan's belongings away, I changed the locks and installed a video doorbell. Hearing my sharp response, Lily's face turned pale. She tugged on Ethan's sleeve, her eyes instantly welling up with tears. Ethan moved the phone to his ear, his tone growing harsher. "Sophie, there's no need to speak so unpleasantly. Lily isn't a mistress." I let out a sarcastic laugh, choosing not to argue further with Ethan. Instead, I agreed to meet him at a nearby cafe. My friend offered to go with me, but I declined. "It's fine. It's just a divorce. Tossing away rotten garbage, it's a win for me." Ethan parked his car on the roadside, but Lily didn't get out. She sat in the passenger seat, leaning against the car window to peer into the cafe. Our eyes met briefly before she quickly looked away, rolling up the window. When Ethan walked in, I had already shifted my gaze. He sat across from me and slid the divorce agreement toward me. Ethan had always been like this. Once he made a decision, he executed it decisively. "Take a look. If there's anything you're not satisfied with, let me know. I'll have the lawyer revise it." I glanced over it briefly. The reason for divorce was listed as irreconcilable differences, and the division of assets was 50-50. I pushed the agreement back toward him, my eyes fixed on his face. He seemed less and less like the Ethan I remembered. Looking at him now, I couldn't find a trace of the love we once shared. I took a sip of the coffee in front of me, deliberating for a long while before finally asking him, "Do you still remember the promise you made to me before we got married?" Ethan replied without even pausing to think, "Sophie, I really don't love you anymore. Can we part ways amicably? For the sake of the 10 years we've been together, let's not drag this out." He spoke with his brows tightly furrowed, his fingers tapping the table rhythmically. "Drag this out?" I shook my head with a faint smile. "Ethan, I'm not dragging this out with you. I just wanted to ask if the things you said before still hold true. And if they don't, then the written promise you made with your own hand should still count, shouldn't it?" Perhaps it was because of the long-distance relationship or simply growing used to being alone, but I'd found my heart had grown stronger. So strong that even when the person I'd loved for 10 years suddenly changed, I could accept it quickly. With or without him, it didn't seem to make much difference. He froze for a moment. "What do you mean?" I slid a copy of the paper that had fallen out of the wedding photo frame in front of him. "I'm not showing you the original. According to what you wrote, the car, the house, and the savings are all mine." Ethan stormed off in frustration. Watching his face turn progressively red, the suffocating weight in my chest seemed to dissipate significantly. Especially when he saw the words he had written with his own hand. It was as if he finally remembered. His expression turned a colorful mix of emotions. "Sophie, you know what? I'm so sick of how petty you've become." His lips pressed into a thin line, and he spat out the words through gritted teeth. I suppose I should feel sad. To think that he came to resent me so much without me even realizing it. But honestly, I didn't feel very sad. "Ethan, this isn't about being petty. People should be held accountable for every action they take and every word they say. Being petty was just me asking him to honor his promise. He had said that if he ever did anything to betray me after we got married, he would leave with nothing. It was his own promise. How had that turned into me being petty?" Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose, taking his time before finally speaking. "Sophie, this is exactly why I don't love you anymore. Lily wouldn't act like this. She knows how to handle things with grace." After Ethan left, I stared at his retreating figure and laughed until tears formed in my eyes. Grace. It wasn't that I didn't know how to handle things with grace. It was precisely because I did that, when I realized our marriage and love had rotted away, I chose to cut my losses and step back. Perhaps Ethan had never imagined that the empty promise he made 6 years ago would come back to hit him squarely between the eyes. That's why he was so flustered and furious. He was free to pursue his idea of passionate love. I had no objections. But I was free to demand that he fulfill his grandiose promises from the past. He shouldn't object either. After leaving the coffee shop, I went to see the lawyer my best friend had recommended. I hadn't managed to gather much evidence of Ethan's infidelity, nor did I want to prolong things with him. That day, after seeing the pair of high heels by the door, I had turned on my phone's recording function. Later, when Ethan sent Lily away and sat down to discuss divorce with me, he revealed everything about their relationship. From how they met, to what drew him to Lily, to how he no longer had to pretend he loved me. Don't worry. You've got a strong case. The other party has explicitly admitted to cheating and even suggested compensation. This written promise from before the marriage is essentially a fidelity agreement. Did he personally leave his fingerprint on it? The lawyer, who looked about my age, furrowed her brows tightly as she listened to the recording. Her expression only relaxed slightly when she saw the promise Ethan had written. I nodded. Yes, he personally left his fingerprint on it on our wedding day. Memories came flooding back, as if a dam had been breached and the past came rushing out. 6 years ago, Ethan and I had just graduated, brimming with the fiery passion of young love. We couldn't wait to get married. So our parents sat down together to discuss the wedding. Back home, dowries were typically quite high. Ethan's parents exchanged worried glances, their faces reddening as they hesitated to speak. I stepped in to ease the awkwardness between our families. Mom, Dad, it's fine. However much is given as a dowry, it'll come back to them anyway. Let's just keep it simple. A symbolic number like $6,600 or $8,800 would be great. It's lucky, too. As for the house and car, Ethan and I can save up and buy them ourselves. You don't need to worry about it. Life is what you make of it, and I know we'll make it work. Back then, Ethan and I were both so certain that our future would be bright, certain that neither of us would ever change. I didn't take the dowry. In secret, I returned it to Ethan's parents untouched. Ethan was moved to tears. So, on our wedding day, in front of all our friends and family, he solemnly wrote down that promise. He said he might not be able to provide me with a luxurious life right away, but he would try his best. His future would always include me. Everything he owned would also belong to me. So, everything he owned, except for love, should be mine. When I returned home, Ethan's parents were waiting at the door. They rarely visited on weekend evenings. For some reason, my heart sank. I quickly walked up to them. Mom, Dad, what brings you here? Why didn't you call me? Have you been waiting long? I took the large bags from their hands and hurriedly opened the door. I had changed the locks, along with the passcode. Sophie, is there something you're hiding from us? They exchanged glances and hesitated for a long time before asking me. I froze for a moment. Although Ethan and I had reached the point of divorce, we had agreed not to alarm our parents until everything was finalized. No, of course not. I feigned nonchalance and answered decisively. Ethan's parents had always been good to me. I couldn't cook, so they would visit every few days to prepare meals I loved. They would go out of their way to buy my favorite cakes and desserts. The fridge was always stocked with fresh fruits and yogurt. In the past, when they came over, I would chat with them about family matters and cheer them up. But today, sitting face to face with them on the couch, I felt an urge to escape for the first time. Marriage was never just between two people. Divorce wasn't either. Has Ethan been arguing with you? Why didn't you tell us about the pregnancy? Such a big thing. If Ethan upset you, just tell us. We'll give him a good scolding, Ethan's mother said while observing my expression. Her words made my heart skip a beat, leaving me momentarily stunned. I hurriedly tried to deny it. I didn't. This morning, I ran into your Aunt Mary, she told us. She said you've been going to her clinic for checkups. From the moment I found out I was pregnant to deciding to have an abortion, it only took one day. I specifically booked the procedure at a different hospital. After scheduling the appointment, the whirlwind of divorce matters left me disoriented. I had forgotten that news of the pregnancy couldn't be kept under wraps. Aunt Mary, the doctor who performed my ultrasound, was a longtime friend of Ethan's mother. There's no particular reason, I just don't want it. At 10 p.m., I was sitting cross-legged on the couch, under the piercing stares of my parents. They had rushed in from out of town, buying tickets as soon as they learned about the pregnancy. It should have been a time for joy and celebration. But after they found out about my decision to terminate the pregnancy, the tension in the room became suffocating. Ethan's parents sat on the side, trying to console my parents. They opened their mouths to speak, but quickly fell silent. They must have guessed that there were problems between Ethan and me. Sophie, did Ethan upset you? I'll call him right now. Ethan's mother dialed his number without hesitation. I didn't stop her. The phone rang several times before it was answered. "Hello." A sugary female voice came through the speaker. Ethan's mother's hand trembled, and the phone slipped from her grasp, landing on the carpet with a dull thud. Ethan and I had the same habit. We memorized the numbers of the people closest to us instead of saving them in the contact list. I glanced at the phone screen, still displaying an ongoing call, and let out a faint smile. Perfect. I didn't have to explain anything. Ethan's father shot up from the couch and stormed out the door. Ethan's mother picked up the phone, glanced at me, and followed him out. In the end, it was just me and my parents left in the living room. Their expressions grew even darker. I shrugged, exhaling a long breath of relief. The procedure is scheduled for next Wednesday. Ethan's parents immediately traveled to the city where Ethan worked. They must have unleashed their fury on him. At 4 a.m., Ethan called me, his voice filled with rage. "Sophie, I just realized how disgusting you truly are. You couldn't get pregnant all this time, and now, just as we're divorcing, you claim you're pregnant? Isn't it convenient timing for you to tell me now? You'll do anything to get more out of the divorce settlement. Let me make this clear, I'm absolutely going through with this divorce." I leaned against the couch, turned off the speakerphone, and hung up. He was right. After all this time, the pregnancy came at the worst possible moment. I placed my hand on my abdomen. My heart felt as though it was being pricked by needles, aching with a dull, persistent pain. I wasn't sad about Ethan's betrayal. This was just how love worked, wasn't it? When I turned my head, I saw my parents standing in the hallway, gazing at me with eyes filled with worry and pain. I couldn't sleep. Neither could they. "It's okay, sweetheart. Mom and Dad will take you to the hospital next week. Once you're better, we'll take you on a trip. You've always wanted to go abroad, haven't you?" I nodded, my eyes suddenly stinging with an unbearable ache. In the end, the only people who stood by me were my parents. It seems like everyone else changes, but they never will. Ethan's mother called shortly after. It sounded like she had been crying. Her voice was hoarse as she kept apologizing to me over the phone. "I'm sorry, Sophie. It's my fault for failing to raise him properly. Please don't act impulsively. His father and I will bring him back tomorrow and make him apologize to you. Can you forgive him just this once, please?" On the other end of the line, I could even hear Ethan's father scolding him. But betrayal only happens once or countless times. Besides, Ethan doesn't need my forgiveness. What he wants is love. Ethan was eventually dragged back home forcefully by his parents. The once empty living room suddenly felt crowded. When I stepped out of the bedroom, I happened to see Ethan being kicked through the door by his father. Just one glance, and my stomach churned with nausea. I rushed to the bathroom and dry heaved for what felt like forever. When I came out, I locked eyes with Ethan. His gaze was filled with disdain for me. He stood near the entryway, having a tense standoff with his parents. "What were you thinking? Do you even realize you have a wife? How could you be seduced by some little tramp out there? Ethan, are you determined to disgrace the entire family?" Ethan's mother slapped him repeatedly as she vented her anger. The mention of Lily seemed to stir something in Ethan's emotions. He pressed his lips together. "Lily isn't a tramp. Mom, watch your words." I calmly sat on the couch, watching this drama unfold before me. Never in my wildest dreams did I think Ethan and I would end up in such a cliché soap opera. All this talk of love leads to nothing but disgust, like swallowing a fly. "Mom, Dad, you should go home. You know I can't tolerate this. You've always known that. I'll have my lawyer handle the divorce with Ethan." I stopped Ethan's parents from speaking further. A chaotic morning it had drained me, and probably them too. After saying this, I got up from the couch and headed to the kitchen. By the next day, my parents seemed much calmer. They pretended nothing had happened and busied themselves in the kitchen for half the day. When I walked in, my dad lifted the lid off a pot. "Look, I made your favorite seafood chowder." Infidelity during marriage is never something to be proud of. I didn't make a public spectacle out of it. That was my way of respecting the 10 years we'd been together. But Ethan didn't see it that way. He didn't want to admit to the promises he had made, and his discussions with my lawyer were far from amicable. "If it comes to it, we'll go to court. I won't back down. I'll make him honor his commitments." Not long after my procedure, I got a call from the lawyer. I made my stance clear, and the lawyer agreed with my approach. After hanging up, my mom patted my hand. "All right, don't get upset. You need to rest and recover after the surgery. You've taken time off work, haven't you? I nodded. As I looked up, I saw Lily standing at the hospital room door. I had no idea how she found me, but her expression was full of smugness and provocation. I frowned, utterly baffled. Why do mistresses always feel the need to flaunt themselves in front of the wife for attention? After Ethan was brought back home, she had proactively added me on social media. She told me Ethan had said it himself, that being with her finally made him understand what love really meant. She said Ethan had long grown tired of me. Honestly, there was no need for her to push me. Even without her, I was leaving. Following my gaze, my parents turned to look at the door, their expressions puzzled. "Who's that? Do you know her?" I thought for a moment and shook my head. "Not really. She's Ethan's mistress." My voice wasn't loud, but it wasn't soft either. There were other people in the hospital room. When they heard the word mistress, their glances toward Lily turned cold and disdainful. One of the patient's family members closest to the door marched forward and slammed it shut. Before the door closed, they spat, "Disgusting." See, being a mistress comes with universal contempt. Divorce litigation takes time. By the time I was discharged from the hospital, our case hadn't even been scheduled yet. As soon as I got home, my best friend showed up excitedly with good news. She had pulled some strings, and it seemed my case with Ethan would be going to court very soon. I consulted a lawyer. Winning is definitely not an issue. But are you sure you've got all the joint assets calculated accurately? I nodded. The house and car we bought after the wedding are all accounted for. Ethan's salary was always deposited into my bank account on schedule. He even sent me his pay stubs voluntarily. Even after he started his affair with Lily, he never slacked off in this regard. Looking back now, if he hadn't played his role so flawlessly, how could I have not noticed a thing? I forced a light-hearted joke. Love or not, as long as the money is there, that's all that matters, right? Then those gifts he bought for his mistress, you need to get those back too. My best friend glared at me and reminded. The gifts weren't worth much. I know, whatever needs to be reclaimed, I'll make sure it is. Thanks to Lily adding me on social media and her love for flaunting her relationship in her posts, I had no trouble gathering evidence. Every single thing Ethan bought for her was posted online, and I took screenshots to send to my lawyer. The lawyer replied with a simple "got it," reassuring me to leave it to him. During the court proceedings, Ethan's parents came to visit me several times. They knew the code to the building, but they always rang the doorbell first. They would only come in after I opened the door. At first, I thought they were here to convince me to back down, to part ways with Ethan amicably without taking things to court. But it seemed they genuinely just wanted to check on me. Every visit, they brought homemade soup and left after urging me to take care of myself. Initially, my parents responded coldly, but eventually, they started making excuses to avoid these visits altogether. Once, two families became one because of Ethan and me. Now, one family became two again because of Ethan and me. On the day of the court hearing, Ethan fought tooth and nail. He didn't deny his affair. He even managed to glance lovingly at Lily, who was sitting in the gallery, as if he were some kind of romantic hero waving the flag of true love. Ethan's parents, on the other hand, looked at him with increasing disappointment. His father, who had spent most of his life in military service, probably never imagined his own son would stoop to such behavior. That promise I wrote was indeed from the day we got married, but it's not a legally binding document. It holds no legal standing, and I do not acknowledge it. Then why write it at all? I looked at this stranger, who used to be my husband, and couldn't help but laugh, until I brought out the wedding video. In it, Ethan had written the promise and read it aloud, word by word, to the entire room. His voice, amplified by the microphone, echoed throughout the hall. He said he was willing to be held accountable by everyone present, that for his entire life, he would only love me. He said if he ever cheated, all his savings, the house, the car, everything would be mine, and he wouldn't take a cent. He said it himself. No one forced him. He wrote it himself. No one forced him. In the end, the law sided with me. The mortgage and car payments had been fully paid off 2 years earlier. We had no significant debts. After 6 years of marriage, most of our savings were in my account. Ethan wanted to appeal, but his parents stopped him. "Enough! Stop embarrassing yourself," his father growled, his face dark with anger, before slapping Ethan hard across the face. Ethan's mother shook her head and walked over to me, gently taking my hand and pressing a bank card into my palm. "The pin is your birthday. This is from us. If Ethan failed to cherish you, that's his loss." Ethan overheard this and let out a cold laugh. Sarcastically, he said, "Sophie, don't you think you reek of greed? All you care about is the house, the car, the savings. You make me sick." It was hilarious. I've already got the house, the car, and the savings. Why would I want some abstract notion of love? I've had it before, and it was worse than garbage. Ethan grabbed Lily's hand and stormed toward the parking lot without looking back. After thinking for a second, I ran after them. "Ethan," I called out, "make sure the car is washed before you deliver it to me." The car was mine. According to the court ruling, he had to hand it over within a month. Ethan froze, turned around, and glared at me with hatred. Lily quietly pulled her hand from his grip, her steps growing slower and more hesitant. I exchanged a knowing look with my best friend, trying not to laugh. Ethan, of all people, still believed in love in this materialistic world, especially the so-called love between him and Lily. All the gifts he bought for her, the court ordered them to be returned. Ethan claimed he'd find a way to make it up to me, so I didn't push the matter further. I pulled up my chat history with Lily and showed it to my best friend. Lily had said that a marriage without love is like a pile of sand. It's bound to collapse sooner or later. My best friend burst into uncontrollable laughter. After all, a relationship without a solid financial foundation is like a house built on sand. And sometimes, that sand scatters even faster than you'd imagine. In accordance with the court's ruling, Ethan waited until the very last day to finalize the transfer of the house and car to me. His parents, still feeling sorry for him, decided to leave their small home for him to live in. The elderly couple quietly moved back to their countryside hometown. Before they left, I went to see them off. I also returned the bank card they had handed me and called them Mom and Dad for the last time. Standing at the entrance of the administrative building, Ethan hesitated for a long while before speaking. "If I said I regret it, would you forgive me?" "I'm serious, Sophie. I think I really regret it." My best friend was utterly speechless. I opened my mouth, holding the ticket for our turn at the counter, and urged him to hurry up. I didn't even bother to look him in the eye. "Ethan, don't you think you're being unnecessarily dramatic right now? It's honestly disgusting." Once the paperwork was done, I was finally free to part ways with Ethan for good. As I was about to leave, he suddenly grabbed my arm. "Sophie, you're colder than I ever imagined. How can you throw away 10 years of love like it's nothing, without even leaving me a chance to make things right?" He seemed genuinely unable to understand my decisiveness. Well, of course. From the moment I discovered his betrayal to the moment we officially ended things, it had only been 3 months. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I stayed as calm as an outsider. I shook off his hand and deliberately mocked him. Because I know that no matter how much it hurts, there's no going back for us. Besides, didn't you find your exciting new love? Where's your love now? What's the matter? You and Lily were supposed to be so in love, was she not in love with you after all? My best friend couldn't hold back her laughter and burst out giggling. "Come on, Ethan, she's barely in her 20s. Did you really think she was in it for love? You thought you were some romantic hero. When I filed for divorce, I also requested an injunction to freeze our assets. Once the court ruling came through, Lily probably realized she wasn't going to get anything out of this. I heard they had a few nasty fights before she started demanding a breakup. Our laughter must have stung him because he stepped back, looking more defeated than ever. He seemed even more worn out than he had just a month ago. The more I looked at him, the more satisfied I felt. After a moment's thought, I decided to offer him one last piece of advice before walking away. "Good luck, Ethan, and remember, always believe in love."